Okay, great. Thank you, Gina. Hi, my name is Derek Dolby. I'm one of the incoming conveners for the ACRL Access Services Interest Group. Welcome to today's presentation. We're happy to have with us today Christopher Markham, who is the Access and Outreach Services Librarian at the University of San Diego. Today, Christopher will be speaking on student assistant training, from staff directed to self-guided, the evolution of a library student assistant training program. The program will be about an hour. Christopher will be speaking, and he's asked that if you have questions, you submit them, and he'll take the questions after each section of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll pass this on to Christopher. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Derek. Just hopefully everyone can hear me. Maybe you can see me right now too. I've got my video enabled, but I'm going to disable that. I just thought it'd be nice to sort of say, hi, I'm a human being. I'm not just like a recorded voice. You can actually see that I'm here. And then I'm going to cut the video now and move on with the presentation. But thank you everyone for joining us. I know we're all really busy, and it's great to have such a good turnout for this presentation. In terms of our student training program, at USD, we really look at it as sort of a threefold process. Okay, so I'm seeing that someone can't hear very well. Let's see. How about now? Is that a little better? Get a little bit closer? Still having trouble? Okay, great. It's really a three-tiered process for us. It starts with hiring. Obviously, you want to hire students that are a good fit for your organization and structurally and culturally. It moves to training. You want to train them effectively and efficiently. And then, of course, the third tier is sort of training, is retaining them, right? And I'm not sure how to deal with that muffled issue. Maybe if you guys have any advice on that, maybe Derek or Freddie can help out with that. So what today's presentation is really going to look at is our training program in those three areas. It's going to compare and contrast where we were in terms of hiring and training and retaining students in 2012 with where we are now. It's going to outline specific steps that we've taken to improve in each of these areas. It's also going to offer tips and suggested tools to help you all improve your efforts as well. And there'll be time for questions again at the end of each of these three sections. So the goal for today, there's really two of them. First of all, that everyone leaves with at least one practical tip or suggested resource to help you refine your program or implement a new one with positive implications for library service. The second one is really to create a supportive environment for discussion. When I saw this call to participate in these forums, I thought I had just taken on a kind of management position in my department, and I was just beginning to look in that sort of holistic way now as a manager, like what are we doing and what are we doing well and what do we need to be doing, and sort of thinking about these things in this broad way. And I thought, what a great opportunity to share with colleagues, have some discussion, see what I can learn from you all. Maybe I can share something that'll be useful to you. So just want to keep this as a goal in mind too for today's presentation. Try to keep it supportive and open. And certainly in the spirit of everyone leaving with at least something useful, I'd like to take about 30 seconds or so, just invite everyone in the audience to take a minute to think about why you came here today. What is it that you're hoping to get out of today's presentation? If you want to share that in the chat, that would be great. Maybe we can collect a few of those, Derek or Freddie, and look back on those. But let's take about 30 seconds, a little awkward silence here while we all think about what we're hoping to get out of today's talk. And I see some folks looking for some new ideas. We're definitely going to have some of those for you for sure. Some tools, definitely going to share some of those with you, Marie, for sure. Yeah, and look at a little compare and contrast, right? What are you doing versus what we're doing? Yeah. Great. These are some great ideas. Excellent. Thank you, guys. All right. So here's our agenda, pretty straightforward. We're going to start with hiring. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but again, for us, it's really important to consider all three of these things as part of a whole. If you don't hire the right people, they're difficult to train. If you don't train them well, they're difficult, it's difficult for them to perform well. And if you don't make efforts to retain them, you're wasting time training them and hiring them, right? So we want to take that approach. We'll spend some time talking how and why we evolved in the hiring process, and have time for questions. Same with the training. How did we go from this sort of super labor-intensive, really staff-directed to a more self-guided approach? Also offer some suggested tools and times for questions there. And then finish up with retaining. Same format. Talk really briefly about next steps, but not a ton of time on that. Just want to point out where we're at, sort of particularly in terms of assessment. And then hopefully in the conclusion, we'll have time. That'll be an opportunity to maybe share on the screen something that someone wants to see. So if you want to see a demo or I want to see this tool in action, or I want to see what your training checklist looks like, hopefully in the concluding section, now we'll have a few minutes to do that. We won't be doing that throughout. So that's the agenda. So you can figure out at which point you want to leave. So just a little bit of context in terms of 2012, in terms of context for the university. We're a small private university. Typically, we have about 25 to 30 library student assistants in our area at any one time. When we came on scene in 2012, the historical practices or historical processes for hiring, training, and retaining students were very informal, very ad hoc. That was a big challenge. Sort of compounding that historical issue was that we had a major reorganization of the department in late summer of 2011, and that left us with almost no institutional memory. When we came in the late summer of 2011 and through the fall of 2011, it was literally a crisis. I mean, we had nothing to go on, virtually nothing to go on. So that's really what led us to create this really firm foundation and really got us looking at training in this kind of more holistic way. And that's kind of where we started, right? And because we started in a sort of crisis point, a lot of times over the years, we've been reacting to problems more so than anticipating them. Not that we never anticipate them and don't have some assessment, but really we're now to the point in 2019 where we can move forward with like full program assessment. And that's one of the things I hope people can get out of today is that, you really have to have these foundational things in place in order to get to that next level. Can't assess something you don't have, right? So that's sort of the context and the challenges that we were facing when we got into this. So hiring, right? Now we're on to phase one, right? Part one. In 2012, there were a lot of problems, but these are the basic ones. Difficult to assess candidates for organizational fit, right? We didn't have like an interview guide or anything like that in place. And so the process took a lot of staff time as well, because we didn't have sort of checklist or really anything in place to help us. It was kind of ad hoc and informal, right? And it didn't really mimic best practices for hiring full-time staff at our institution. It was kind of like hiring student assistants wasn't the same. It was like, well, they're student assistants. They might be here a year or two. Do we really need to take it as seriously as we would hiring a full-time staff person? Just in terms of that. So that was kind of what we were dealing with in 2012 in terms of hiring. And these are some of the solutions that we came up with. We're just going to go through this. In 2012, the first two things we did really was develop an interview guide to help us identify really good candidates. And we've revised that multiple times, 13, 16, 2018, and also developed an onboarding checklist and revised that multiple times. When you're talking about onboarding, it's not the same as training. If anyone's unfamiliar with that term, what we're talking about is really those pre-employment processes and those things that you have to do that students have to get done right after those. And yeah, definitely be willing to share those documents with you, no doubt. Morgan. We're talking about, they have to fill out some paperwork. They have to go through a background check. They have to complete a FERPA training. There's certain things that students have to do and that we have to make sure they get done, even before we begin the training. So having a checklist for that was really, really helpful. Before we had developed the checklist, it was so time consuming. We were literally like, well, we didn't know exactly what, each student needed to get done. So that was a huge solution for us. In 2013, all our staff began attending annual HR training and hiring and evaluating student assistants. And that's proved really critical in helping all the staff who supervise students and evaluate them be in touch with best practices and be on board with what the university is doing and just do a better job with that. In terms of and then we also began attending our campus job fair and posting on campus job website to enrich our candidate pool. Previous to that, we were we might have 15 applications for 10 spots. And shortly after we started getting the word out more and being more involved and engaged and reaching out to potential candidates, now we're to the point where we're getting, we have 35, 40, applications for 8 spots. So our pool is much richer just from making that extra effort to do a little bit more outreach to potential candidates. So some of the results of these changes that we made in terms of hiring, obviously having an interview guide makes it much easier to identify candidates that fit our organization, right? So we have questions on our interview guide that really get to the characteristics we're looking for in students, such as flexibility or customer service oriented, not so much about what their skills are and things that we can train them in, right? So our initial interview guide had a component where we asked students to demonstrate, their knowledge of like LC call number system. We quickly realized that wasn't a good use of time, right? We can train students to understand the LC classification system and shelve well. We can't necessarily train them to be flexible or, customer service oriented, right? So the guide really helped us be much more efficient in identifying good candidates. The onboarding checklist made it much easier for us to ensure consistency as we onboarded students. And that was tremendously helpful for us. Saved us a ton of time. In terms of recruiting students online, obviously that diversified our pool and as a result, improved the quality of the candidate pool, right? When you have diverse pool, you have higher quality. And then, of course, regular training keeps us in line with best practices in hiring and training at USD. And that's really a testament to our relationship. Someone's asked, do we have a good relationship and support from HR? Absolutely. We're a very small campus, so we don't have like HR in-house. But as I said, all our staff attend regular training. I call them all the time. When it comes to hiring in particular, a good relationship with HR and reaching out to them and finding out, do they have a checklist model you can use? Do they have a model for an interview guide that you can use? HR is really where it's at when it comes to improving your hiring. And that's really the hiring tip that I have to offer. Work with HR to develop your process for hiring, to make sure that and onboarding so that it really mimics the best practices for hiring full-time staff at your institution. These are students, even though they have sort of a natural matriculation point where they're definitely going to leave, it's still really important to invest in them and still really important to take the time to hire folks that you want to keep around as long as you can. If you hire a sophomore, keep them 3 years. If you hire a freshman, try to keep them 4 years. That's kind of our mentality and sort of incorporating all 3 of these phases in our training. And get training from HR and update your process regularly. Things are always changing. Best practices are changing. Laws in your state are changing. When it comes to, how long students can work and all kinds of things. So really developing a relationship with HR is a huge tip that I want to offer you guys today for that. And these are some of the tools, but having a guide and having an onboarding checklist, these are our major tools that really help us do a much better job in terms of hiring since 2012. And again, these are tools that evolve, almost yearly, but certainly biannually. So now we can take a minute to answer questions. I think I've answered a few relative to hiring. Definitely want to clip along onto training, but if anyone has a pressing question right now.
Chris, I just want to break in and said there was a previous question about how much support do you have from your HR department. I know you just talked about that, so I don't know if there's anything you want to elaborate on.
I would just say we have a lot. You know, when we call them, they answer the phone. They also, if you can go to our website, the university's website, and look at, they have so much documentation to help different organizations. They have onboarding checklist models. They have best practices outlined. They have a lot of documentation that could help anyone, whether you're at our university or somewhere else. Now, depending on your context, public or private or wherever you're at, you know, practices will be a little bit different, but there's a lot of training that HR does, and we get a ton of support. How do you handle work-study placements? So basically, our budget manager is responsible for doing the initial review of candidates, whether or not they actually, do they have a work-study award? Should we even bother to potentially interview them, right? So she filters down the candidates that are eligible to be interviewed, and then we go from there. We pick up from there where we reach out to the potential candidate and invite them for an interview, conduct the interview, and then follow up if we're going to hire them. So we don't follow up with students that we're not going to hire. So one thing that we tell potential candidates when we're interviewing them is, you know, and we try to keep it very professional, right? So we say things like, if you were the successful candidate for this position, how would you handle this situation? But in closing, we also say, listen, we really appreciate your time today. This is a very competitive process. If you're the successful candidate, you will hear from us by this date. If you don't hear from us by this date, you know that you're not the successful candidate, and we wish you well in your search for employment on campus, and this is your library, and we want to encourage you to come back and make this a good place for you, and try again next year. If you don't get a job this time, if you're really serious about working for us, try again. So how do you compete with other university departments or even other employers? And how do you promote the library as a good place to work to ensure you receive an adequate number of applications? Well, in terms of competing, the big thing that we have in terms of an advantage is that we're open like 120 some hours a week. We're open more than almost anyone else on campus. So we offer tremendous flexibility for students. I'll talk about our process for scheduling students in a minute, but that makes it really easy for us to be flexible with our students. Students love that. They want to be able to work when they're available. They want to be able to flex their schedule weekly, if not bi-weekly or monthly. That's one of the really strong things that we have. And obviously, we're going to talk about some of the things we're doing to retain students. We promote those. We advertise those. Students know about them. They know that we have a student scholarship program. They know that we do workshops just for them. So some of the retention things we're going to touch on help us compete as well and help students understand that it's a good place to work. And as we've been engaging in all these practices and evolving, word gets around, right? Our best students tell their friends, and we take their recommendations seriously. When a really good worker recommends someone, they're worth taking a look at, right? We pay them minimum wage. They have the opportunity to get raises as they advance in responsibility. But they're based on a work-study award. So when you talk about pay increases, what you're talking about is the same amount of money for less work, right? So a student who gets a pay raise gets the same amount of money in 8 hours of work that they used to get in 10 hours of work, right? So they just have a set amount of money that they're spending each semester. So the pay raises are sort of more about getting the same amount for less work. Minimum wage in California is very high, and that's something that we've had to address. We've had to get more students just because the pool is shrinking. So I want to move on to training really quickly. I appreciate all those questions. If we didn't get to something, hopefully we can bring it up later in the discussion. But let's move on. Training. And this is sort of the bulk of it, right? This is where I think a lot of you are hoping to get some new ideas and whatnot. The problems that we had, and again, there were more problems than these 5, but these are sort of the major ones. the training was very ad hoc and as a result, very labor intensive. It was kind of like, hey, basically student got a tour of the building, got some real basics on checking stuff in and checking stuff out, and then was told, hey, it's on the job training, ask us questions as you have them, ask your fellow students questions as you have them, that kind of thing. So that made it really labor intensive because you're always going back and answering students' questions and correcting them. Just a really unfair kind of way, in my opinion, not to be too critical of how it was before, but really a problem that we had to address. And there was no way to track training and ensure consistency, right? We didn't have a checklist to follow that students followed to ensure this is what we told every single student. We know we told all the students all these things, and then we can assess areas where we need to improve. And as we see that students aren't meeting expectations in a particular area or aren't understanding something, we can make adjustments. So really a major issue, not being able to track students, what we actually told one student versus another, made the training really inconsistent. And of course, learning was really difficult to assess in that environment. It was really difficult to assess whether or not the students were actually learning what we needed them to learn when we didn't even know what one student versus another had been told in the first place, right? And also very difficult in that environment to ensure peer learning and active learning opportunities, which we know from the literature is really important in training for all our new hires. Certainly there was some peer learning going on because the students were being told, ask your fellow student, and certainly active learning opportunities in that environment. But ensuring that all the new hires had opportunities like that there was no way to track that. And scheduling was a total nightmare, On paper, very difficult for us to be flexible. And as I mentioned, one of those things that made it not as desirable a place to work as it is now for students. Students really care about their schedule. So some solutions to those problems. In 2012 and 13, we implemented a training checklist in order to sort of standardize the training and improve efficiency, make sure we're telling students all the same things and supervisors could go through a list. We created a student assistant handbook to save staff time with onboarding issues and also to set expectations for our students. The students have to read the handbook and agree to it. It's like a pre-employment thought process. And this was something, again, that we got from our HR department, setting expectations early, setting them high, getting students to agree to them. And then in that evaluation process, you can go back to that. Hey, the student assistant handbook says X, and I noticed that you haven't been doing that. You agreed to do that. What can we do to help you get on board with this? Sort of a way to hold students accountable. So if you don't have a handbook, definitely recommend it. And that is another thing, like the checklist for onboarding or the training checklist and so on. These are all things that evolve over time and that you need to update regularly. We also established an annual orientation event, which is sort of really more about bringing the new students together, letting them meet each other, socialize a little bit, have some food, but also get that full context. So they work in access services, but what do they do in technical services? What is an integrated library system? Just a chance to kind of get all the new folks together and orient them a little bit beyond the onboarding and beyond the training to sort of get that full picture of the library and what's going on in other parts where they're not necessarily working. And at that time, we also implemented the When2Work scheduling software. That's an online system. It's super robust. I can't recommend it enough. If you have more than 15 students, consider it. It does cost an annual fee, and the fee goes up depending on how many people you have in the system. But if you don't know anything about When2Work or haven't tried it out, I can't recommend it enough. Check it out. At least consider it, piloting it. I hate to be a plug for the corporation there, but just been such a help for us. It's really self-guided for the students. They can trade shifts. They can pick up shifts that need to be filled. They can tell us exactly when they can work and when they can't. And once we publish the schedule, we just leave it hands off. Hey, you're expected to be at your shift. If you can't make it, work it out. And When2Work lets them do that on their own. So we're not always taking calls and trying to fill holes. The system lets the students do it themselves, and it's 100% worth $150 a month or a year, excuse me. And we incorporated a post-training quiz, obviously, right, for assessment of, okay, we've done this training, now we need to sort of get a sense of what they've learned and what they didn't. And that's still a little bit cumbersome because we still sort of go to each individual student. Oh, I see you didn't get these, and follow up with them. So, you know, that's still happening. We're looking to move a little bit beyond that, but very important addition in 13. In 2014, we incorporated some more peer training opportunities into our checklist. We noticed that there were a lot of opportunities where students who had a year of experience or a semester of experience could show other students how to do things, so we incorporated those elements. We made training modular in 2016 to enhance consistency, right? So what we saw was, it was already somewhat modular, but what we saw was the staff involved in taking, the way the checklist was designed initially was so that every supervisor could go through any part of the checklist with the student, right? And what happened with that was that some supervisors were spending 2 or 3 hours on one student, and others were only spending 30 minutes or maybe didn't even do any training with the student. So for the staff, it was very disproportionate, which was frustrating. But also, staff were being asked to train students in areas that weren't necessarily their favorite or their area of expertise. So our IT person wasn't too keen on showing students how to shelve, or, you know, our shelving person wasn't too keen on IT stuff. So what we did was take the training and sort of mash it down and say, okay, IT person, you're going to be responsible for 1 hour for each student and nothing else, just on the IT stuff. Shelving person, you're going to be responsible just for the shelving, 1 hour. So it leveled the playing field in terms of this amount of staff time that everyone was spending, and it gave the staff motivation to really do a great job with their individual section. They didn't have to worry about all the areas that were outside of their purview. Just quickly, when we're talking about peer training, what we mean is opportunities for students to train other students. So there's certain elements in our checklist now where it's up to a student who's already been trained to show their peer who's coming on board how to do that. In 2017, we made orientation biannual. We noticed that there was a need to orient students who were returning in the spring from study abroad, for example. Occasionally, we hire 1 or 2 students in the spring. So we really just saw a need to sort of add a little extra layer of orientation. In 2018, we added the videos and the self-guided tour of the access areas, including reserves and ILL, to save staff time. And here in 2018, this is where we started to hone in on this self-guided concept and save staff time with the self-guided tour of the 2 different areas, along with some homemade training videos and tutorials that staff created. And also in 2018, taking the reference component out. So we were struggling with making sure that students understood what the reference department did and the importance of referring students from access services to reference. And it was taking a lot of our time. We're not the reference. So we reached out and cooperated with them to create an interactive online game for students. And we have a couple reference librarians who take them through that process. That has improved anecdotally. We're still assessing this, is pretty early, but it's definitely improved referrals. Referrals are up from access services over to reference now because of that. But it also saved us a lot of time. And in 2019, we added, just this spring, we've added an interactive spring assessment quiz. Again, just an extra layer of assessment in the spring. Instead of only doing it immediately after the training, now we do it in the spring, and that helps students returning. But also, we really loved what the reference department was doing with their interactive quiz. It's like a game. It's so much fun. We use a tool called Kahoot. I'm going to talk about that. But some of you have been using Kahoot for years, but it's an awesome way to get students engaged. So we decided, hey, we're going to steal that and create sort of an assessment quiz in the spring. And also created a Google Team Drive to better organize our tools and documents needed for training. Very helpful. We had this kind of huge, cumbersome intranet, and we're sort of slowly migrating the things that we're currently using. You know, there's documents in there from like 2002. And so Google Team Drive, highly recommended as something you want to look at as a way to organize all your training stuff. So the results of that, of all of these changes, there's a few of them. There's some not listed here, but we've reduced staff time per student significantly, basically cut it in half, from 5 to 6 hours of total staff time per new student to 2 or 3 hours. And that has a lot to do with the new self-guided components, the videos, taking the reference training out of our area. And these numbers vary a little bit depending on the student, right? Some students take a little longer than others to do certain things, but we've basically cut our staff time in half over the last 7 years, taking this approach and sort of focusing on that. Right now, we're just in the beginning of trying to assess some of these new elements and figure out, has this impacted? We know that it's improved the amount of time it takes to train students, but how about the quality, right? So we're sort of in the beginning of assessing that, but anecdotally, we have not seen a drop off in the quality of the training or the consistency or anything. So we're optimistic that when we get a closer look, we're going to see that these changes have cut staff time and not hurt the training, maybe hopefully improved it. We've enhanced our assessment of the training outcomes too, right? With the checklist and the quizzes and the improved documentation, much easier to assess what students are learning and what they're not learning, and make adjustments accordingly and follow up with the students accordingly, right? So these are some of the results of the changes that we've made in terms of training, and very, very pleased with the results that we've had. And these are the tools that we have. And again, when we get to the end, we can sort of share some of these, talk more about these, go into detail. But we have our homegrown student supervisor checklist that we follow. We have a homegrown self-guided tour of multiple areas, which includes like the access services area. We have some homegrown video tutorials, and those are not easy to make, my friends, let me tell you. If you're into video, making some video tutorials, it can be done, but it's hard. We have our Winterwork scheduling platform. Our original assessment quiz is on SurveyMonkey. I want to move that to Google Forms, or possibly move it into Kahoot, because we're so high on Kahoot right now in terms of how interactive it is and great it is. And also we have the LC Easy shelving tutorial, which the Library of Congress came out with. It's at 4.0 now. Many of you are familiar with that, I'm sure. Really great tool, and we have a benchmark of 100%. We expect our students to score 100% in that part of the training. If they don't, they have to keep doing it until they do. That's a great tool for showing students, explaining the Library of Congress system to students. And they've really elevated that tool too. The original was good. 4.0 is really good. And that's from the Library of Congress. Okay, questions now. I've seen a few questions. Maybe, Freddie, did you see any major ones?
Well, there were a few. So there was one question as to how you keep your student assistants up to date with the changes, given that they may only work a couple shifts a week.
Yes, so there are things, it is a dynamic environment. So there are things that come up, even weekly, right? We actually have an email address called CL Access, and we use that to communicate with patrons outside, but that's sort of like our like a listserv, where all the staff can communicate things. But then we have one centralized person, our evening librarian. She's sort of the person who is responsible for communicating with all the students things that are changing and happening. So it starts with communicating with the staff first. This has changed, and then it moves to reaching out to the students. So it depends on what the issue is, but typically it's something minor that we could just share in an email, and we just send an email blast to all the students. Hey guys, keep in mind that this is happening this week, or that this recently changed. Sometimes it's something more complicated, so we might just create like a paper checklist at the check-in station where students come to clock in and have them check off that they've been told about this or that. So it really depends on what the issue is and how important it is. If it's a training matter, then we seek to get together with all the students and either create a little quiz for them or create some sort of opportunity to like actually train them on whatever that issue is. And then we embed that into our checklist as a permanent change so that new students coming on, it's just in there. And that's the beauty of having like guidelines and something to follow, is that you just flex it. You just change it as things change. How do you use Kahoot? It's pretty self-explanatory. We don't have a lot of time right now to demo it, but if you go to their website, they have videos. Essentially what it is a way to create interactive quizzes where students are playing a game, right? So they get points, they have a time limit to answer each question. And the best thing about it is it creates opportunities for them as peers to interact with each other and sort of laugh and have fun, but it also creates those great opportunities for us involved in the training to say, oh, I see everyone in the room missed this question. So why is that? And we can sort of immediately react to that and talk to the group about, oh, you know, what's going on here. So that the fact that it's really interactive is really the best part, because it allows for really quick assessment of what students are learning in the moment and what they're not. And also where maybe the question was a bad question. We didn't write a good question, right? So that's what I'll say about Kahoot right now.
Chris, can you comment on how much of the training is on the job?
We try to limit that. I would say it's almost none. I mean, that's our goal. Now, you're always going to have students. It's a lot of training. So we've cut staff involvement in training in half, but you're talking about for each individual student, we're somewhere in the neighborhood. When you add up the self-guided elements and the videos and the onboarding, each student is getting about 15 hours of like material over the course of a couple of weeks, maybe. So they're going to forget stuff. So there is, you know, we have a supervisor on duty all the time. So, you know, there are moments where a student has forgotten something and we have to address that. But obviously the goal of our program is to minimize on-the-job training because it's so time consuming and it can lead to a lot of inconsistency. Maybe one supervisor told a student something but not another, and it's very difficult to assess, right, on-the-job training. So we really try to minimize that. I'd like to say zero, but of course, there's those moments when a student has just forgotten something. And also, the process is changing is pretty dynamic. So sometimes something might have changed that day and we haven't had a chance to let students know about it, right? So a little on-the-job training there. Occasionally when something changes dramatically, but for the most part, very little on the job. Students don't submit reports at the ends of shifts, but reports per se, but they do have opportunities to report problems pretty much dynamically as they happen. We have at least 4 supervisors around at all times. So when a student notices an issue, they pretty much can report it immediately. And then we have that immediate means of communicating with all staff, so that can trickle down very quickly. So the ability for our students to report issues and problems quickly and get those communicated to everyone and get a resolution is pretty fast and pretty dynamic, just because we have it set up to where there's always a supervisor around and we have a quick way to communicate out what the issue is. Again, we don't rely on students in terms of, so the question is, oh, no, you're just stating what you guys do. Okay, thanks, Robin. Sorry about that, okay. So we're about ready to dive into retention. Any other major questions that we want to talk about in terms of training? Again, we'll have a couple minutes at the end.
I think that was all I saw on, as you were speaking.
Yeah, I do see one more. All your procedures written out for students. Some of them are. Some of the really involved ones are, but not all of them. Most of the procedures are pretty straightforward, so as they go through the training, they're going to know them. But all the procedures are written out for staff, and some of them are written out for students when we've identified a need to do that. Yeah, which issues can be resolved at the desk and which ones can be resolved by staff members. That's part of the onboarding and the orientation. Really, what we communicate to our students is we try to give them all the information, all the tools they need, train them well so that they can minimize bringing things to us. But we basically just, in the orientation, we cover, these are some of the issues that we have to deal with. And we just encourage them to come to staff whenever they're not sure. If you're not sure how to handle this, tell the patron, tell the patron, let me get someone who can help you with this, and get a supervisor. Again, there's always a supervisor on duty. We have a supervisor desk, and that is staffed hourly, and we take turns staffing that. So, you know, as problems come up that students can't address, there's literally always someone behind them backing them up. I can describe the process for new student orientation. Let's see if we can hold that to the end, but certainly, essentially what we do is bring in representatives from each department in the library, have them explain to students what they do, so that students can get that sort of context in which they're working. They work in access services, here's what other people do, and we feed them, and we invite them to engage with each other. So we try to keep it pretty light and low key. The orientation is really orientation. It's not training. It's more like, hey, you work in access services. We want you to meet the head of reference. We want you to meet the head of, you know, the technical area. We want you to meet the archivist and sort of get some context of where you're operating. The assessment quizzes are really sort of assessing students' memory and what they actually remember how to do in terms of policies and procedures. Yeah. Not how they react in the moment to a situation. Although I take it back, the spring quiz does some of that. So we might present a scenario in the quiz. What do you do in this situation? A, B, C, or D? And they'll tell us. So I guess it's a little bit of both. Yeah. So moving on to retention, because I want to give us a little bit more time at the end. And again, retaining people that you spent so much time investing in, hiring, and training is really important to us. Our major problem in 2012, there was literally no program designed explicitly to address or improve retention. We had a big staff event full. We had a potluck in the winter for all staff and students. We had a picnic in the summer for all staff and students, and that was sort of the closest thing that we had to some sort of retention effort as I could judge it at that time. And that really wasn't focused on the students. It was really focused on everybody, right? And we all loved it, and it was a good time, and it was cool, but it wasn't really directed just for the students, and it wasn't retention in the way that we think of it now. So how did we address this problem of like no issues or no retention efforts? In 2012 and 13, we piloted a fall and spring student appreciation event. And when I say piloted, because we had no funding, it wasn't library sponsored. It was literally a staff member at the time doing it of her own volition and love for the students and appreciation for the students, buying ice cream and pizza and sort of saying, let's get together and celebrate you. So that was our first effort to sort of start doing something to show appreciation for our students that we knew of. Again, we came in, a lot of institutional memory was lost, so I don't want to get too critical of what was going on before. It's simply that we didn't know in a lot of cases with a lot of this what was going on before. But as far as I could tell, those things weren't happening. We also began honoring graduating seniors with book plates at these first two events. And I love this idea. If you guys aren't doing this, we've had such a great response from our students. What we do is reach out to our graduating seniors and we say, in honor of your service to us since you've been here at the library, we are going to plate a book in your honor. And basically, if you don't know what I mean by plate a book, most library books have a stamp or a sticker on the inside cover that says, you know, belongs to Copley Library. We have those. What we're doing is inviting graduating seniors to pick out a book that means something to them, and then we print out a book plate with a notice in it that says, in honor of, Susan Markham's service to Copley Library, class of 2018, thank you for your service, something to that effect, right? And the students love this. They invite their parent, they take the book home and show it to their parents. When they come back and visit, they go pull their book off the shelf and look at the plate that's the book that they chose that is in their honor. It's just been a very successful, very affordable thing that you can do to honor your students. And we've incorporated it into the end of the year events. And the best part about it is we invite students who are graduating, we bring up the seniors, and we invite them to tell the audience, tell their fellow students why they chose the book that they chose. And we've had some really powerful stories be told by the students. I mean, literally people crying and telling stories, just an amazing minor thing that we did. We did, you know, it seemed kind of small at the time, and it's turned into this really great tradition that we now have. In 2014, we piloted a student scholarship program. My dean came to me and said, "Hey, I have this money, and we're not going to have it next year, but let's try to have a scholarship program. You have 2 weeks." And I was like, "Wow!" So, you know, we put it together. It was a success, and by piloting it, what that enabled us to do was start presenting it to potential donors to get it funded permanently. So piloting the scholarship was a major step for us. Also in 2014, we made the Winter and Spring Appreciation Luncheon a library-sponsored event. So we actually had funding for it, and it was sanctioned by the library, and we made it an official thing. In 2015, we got an endowment for the scholarship. Because we piloted it, sort of proof of concept, to use that term, that IT term, gave us really strong case to make to our now the people who endow the scholarship at $500 for 5 students each year. That's being bumped up because we've had such success with it, and the people endowing it are so pleased, and they've been attending our events to honor the students and so forth. They bumped it up to 1,000, and this is a major incentive. I'm going to show something at the end here to sort of drive this home, but do what you can. If you don't have a student scholarship program, it's very difficult. Where do you get the money, right? It's difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but the first step is to try it, pilot it, develop the application, develop the rubric to evaluate the applicants, do all that legwork one time, and then you can improve upon it. For retention, I found that it's really about piloting, right? Really test the stuff out, give it a try. In 2016, we partnered with Career Services to offer career workshops just for our student assistants. Okay, we got feedback from our student assistants. What are you interested in? What kind of workshops would you want to attend? Career, I want to get a job, I want to get paid. So we partnered with Career Services to say, only library student assistants, we're going to offer you 1 workshop a semester, just the student assistants, and it's going to be focused on career. So a workshop on interviews, how to interview, a workshop on how to write your resume, a workshop on career interest. What are you interested in doing? We do 1 of those a semester. It's a great partnership with Career Services. Doesn't cost us anything. And Career Services loves it. The students love it. We get good attendance. Anywhere from 8 to 15, 16 students attend, which for us, small university, anytime we get 8 or 20 students in a room for a workshop, we're pretty pleased with that attendance. In terms of the scholarship, students can use it for anything. I'm sort of chiming in on a question there, but they can use it for whatever they want. We just cut them a check. They love that too. In 2017, we formalized that workshop series with Career Services. So 2016, it was kind of like a pilot, see how it works, and then formalized it in 17. So some of the results, really what we've seen. So this is just a number, right? And that's what I want to talk about, sort of next steps in terms of assessing our retention. We had 80% of our students return from last fall this fall. And that doesn't include the students who graduated. So that number is a little bit low compared to what it would be had these students not graduated, and that's always an issue. So for us, in terms of retention results, our next step is to develop benchmarks and data points to help us assess like how well these retention efforts are working. We know anecdotally that we're keeping more students, but our next step is to really figure out what do these numbers mean. So a good example of a benchmark that I'm doing in the plan I'm developing now is how many students that we hire in their freshman year stay for 4 years. And then a benchmark would be, we want 90% of our students that we hire as freshmen to stay at least 3 years, right? So the next step for us in terms of retention results is to really figure out, develop a plan for retaining or for assessing that. And we're working with our assessment people on campus actually to develop a full program assessment of all 3 phases of our program. The tips that I have for you, you want to pilot your ideas, go for it. Make mistakes, try it. The best way to prove that you need funding for something is to prove that you can do it in the first place. When you can demonstrate that it works and that you can pull it off, you're more likely to get money to keep it going. You got to partner with others, obviously partly budget issues, but there are people on your campus and your community with more expertise on certain things. We don't have a librarian who's expert in writing interviews or conducting interviews of career-oriented stuff, but we knew our students wanted career-oriented workshops, so we reached out to someone who could give that to them. And also account for study abroad. If you have a study abroad program, we weren't doing that, so we were losing students because we weren't saving spaces for them when they were gone. And we figured out, we worked with our Student Employment Center on campus to deal with that issue, but don't forget that saving spots and staying in touch with those study abroad students while they're gone and making sure they come back, that's really valuable, really valuable to you. So now we're to the questions, and I see a few in the chat, but I want to say quickly before we get to questions here, I want to say something about this photo that you're looking at, just a sort of anecdotal. The young woman on the far end of this photo, she has been with us all 4 years. She has gotten a scholarship all 4 years. She is graduating in the spring. The young woman next to her, she has been with us all 4 years. She got a scholarship in 2017. This is a photo of our 2017 winners. She has been with us all 4 years. The young man in the middle, he was with us all 4 years. He got a scholarship 2 years of the 4 that he was here. When he graduated, he came back to work for us. The young lady to his right has been with us all 3 years. She just applied for another scholarship. One of the scholarship requirements is that you work at least 1 semester. So she is in line to come back for her 4th year and be with us all 4 years. The gentleman on the end, been with us all 4 years. He's won a scholarship twice. I'm really proud when I look at this picture and see that, you know, we still have a long way to go in terms of assessing the retention efforts that we're making, but these students right here that you're seeing are proof positive that we're doing something right, and that this scholarship program is having an impact. These aren't just exceptional students in our community, they're great students to keep around. Really great students are hard to keep. They want to go, they're going to get an internship, they're going to get a full-time job somewhere, you know, keeping them is tough. So I just wanted to share that with you about this photo and these folks in the photo, because I'm really proud of it. So there's a lot of questions. In terms of funding for the scholarship, like I said, initially we didn't have any, we just had this money left over, so we piloted it and said, well, if we don't have any money next year, at least we gave it away the year before. Our dean found, with that sort of proof of concept, our dean found a donor. There's the Holloman Foundation. The Hollamans were people they were the original library directors at our university, and they have a foundation that supports all kinds of different things in the community. But because they were particularly interested in libraries, and both the people in charge of the foundation were library student workers back in the day, it was sort of an easy sell. Once we had proved that we could do it, you know, we got them to fund it. In terms of how we select them, we have a guidelines for the application. You have to write an essay, you have to have a certain GPA. We have a rubric for assessing all those, and we have a committee that works together to evaluate all the applicants and select the most deserving. So again, when you're trying to develop something like this, it really comes down to piloting it, trying it. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, and you'll learn as you go. Not the way to train students, but it is the way to get things off the ground when you don't have anything to start with, right? When you're starting from ground zero, that's kind of what you have to deal with. So I think we have about 5 minutes, 6 minutes for all sorts of questions. So maybe, how do you want to handle this, Freddie? Do you have a few questions written down?
I do. So one question that's come up repeatedly in different ways is, this is more about the interview process and hiring. What criteria do you use to select who to interview, and what do you use in terms of assessing their customer service skills, etc., and how you think they'll perform?
Yeah, so in terms of selecting, it's sort of two-tiered. The first thing is our budget manager determines if they're even eligible, right? So do they have a work-study award and things like that? Once we see that, then we look at their resumes. You know, did they send a resume in? What do we see in terms of their experience that might be valuable? Sort of typically how you would assess like candidates for any other position. The interview process is where we really try to assess how well a student might fit in, or whether or not they might be customer service oriented as we need them to be, or have those characteristics that we're looking for. So I would say the interview guide is our key tool for helping us assess whether or not a candidate would be good for the position. One of the ways that we approach the interview is to let the candidate know, hey, this is an opportunity for you to assess us and decide if we're a good fit for you. It's also an opportunity for us to do the same with you, right? I can share the interview guide. I'll be glad to do that. So we try to approach it like that, kind of try to winnow out students who don't even really want this job, right? When you present student with a sort of a very serious, we're serious people and we're looking for people who have these qualities, some of the candidates that might not be so desirable are they're gonna bow out. They're gonna look for a place that maybe doesn't have as higher standard or isn't gonna be as tough on them or whatever. But in terms of, we used to have a rubric that tried to sort of assess each individual interview guide, and that got to be really, after the fact, just to try to select one from another if we had some that were equal. That proved really cumbersome, and then ultimately we got so many candidates that we kind of just said, well, if the student does a really good job in the interview and gets the right answers that we're looking for, we're gonna give them an opportunity. But also by presenting it as their chance to take the job or not. So part of that is when we make them an offer, we make it clear you can say no. That really helps, sort of giving students that clarity that this is our expectation and this may not be the right place for you. Think about it. Encouraging the candidate to really think, do they want this job? I think is a good thing to do. Can you talk about how you get students to attend orientations or luncheons and get students to know each other? So yeah, so the orientations and luncheons, we pay them, right? So once they're hired, we ask them to clock in. So that's the same for like our workshops that we do. So we allow them to clock in. They're on the job. They're doing something that's relevant to their job. So it's appropriate for them to clock in when they are doing some on-the-job training or orienting or whatever. So that's a major force, right? We use our window work system to schedule the training. So it's very easy. They know they're scheduled for that shift. So for them, these workshops and these orientations are just like another shift, another work shift, right? So that really helps with getting them to actually attend, is treating this like, a shift. You work 10 hours a week and one of those hours is going to be at orientation. And food, right? Food also helps. And I can stay a little bit longer for sure to kind of share some of this stuff. But yeah, I see Jeff says they make them mandatory, and essentially we do make some things mandatory. We make the orientations mandatory for all the new students. We don't make it mandatory for students who have attended orientation previously, but we encourage them to come with food and allowing them to clock in. And in terms of keeping them engaged, we treat orientation a lot like you would any other event for other employees. Icebreakers, icebreakers, that kind of thing. Any other questions?
There was another question or a couple other questions, but people were wondering, how did you handle students that don't take well to the training? What's your process for handling that situation?
Yes, I can speak to that. So we do. I see one here too. We do have performance evaluations, and that's through HR. So we evaluate performance through the HR process every semester. In terms of handling students who aren't taking well to the training, what I can say is part of that is hiring. Again, you want to make sure to hire folks that hopefully will take well to it. We haven't seen a lot of that. So, but what I would say is, obviously all students learn differently. And really, if we see a student who's struggling with something, we try to identify why that is. Is this a student who might do better interacting with a fellow student who's been with us a couple of years? Maybe they need a little bit more peer interaction in the training. Maybe they need some more active learning components. So maybe going through certain parts of the training just one-on-one with staff is challenging for them. Maybe they need a break. But then it could also just come down to sitting down with the students and talking with them. Hey, what's going on? What is it that you need? So we don't have a lot of that, but sort of on a case-by-case basis, that's how we take that. Student is struggling, we just try to assess in the moment what is the issue. But we feel like having all these processes in place really mitigates that. You know, when you're hiring solid people and you have a clear guidelines for how to get them through the training, most folks take to it pretty well. They just follow the guidelines, right? Follow the list. Yes, why don't anyone, let me open the invitation up. Anyone who would like me to share documents with you, please just send me an email. I know I'll get a lot of emails, but I will get back to you. I will send you PDFs of the documentation that you asked for. So just send me an email. Let me show you my email.
Chris, if you'd like, I'm happy to send out an email to the listservs, which I'll be doing for the archived webinar, a link to the archived webinar, and I can include any documents if you'd like to do it that way.
You know what? That's not a terrible idea. I think I'll prefer to just do it one at a time. I know that might be time consuming, but just in the interest of sort of making, you know, seeing where who I'm sharing with. But I'll be happy to, anyone who emails me and asks me specifically for something, I'll be happy to share it with you as a PDF to give you guidance. So just send me an email, cmarkham@sandiego.edu, and I will get back to you in a pretty timely fashion. I won't promise 24 hours, but I'll grab the document that you request and share it with you. Yeah, and I see all this. So when you look at our training checklist, anyone that shares it with us, we have all that stuff in there. Active shooter video that students watch, safety stuff. It's all in there, man. It's a lot of training to do. Like I said, you're talking about 15 hours a student. So that's the beauty of having a process. No, and I see a lot of people thanking me, but I really want to thank you all. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Great opportunity to sort of reflect on what we're doing and think about how we can improve it. And you guys gave me that opportunity, and I want to really thank you for that.
Okay, this is Derek Dolby, just I guess wrapping up. Is there any other questions for Chris? If not, I'll just say thank you very much to Christopher for presenting today, and thank you to everyone for attending. And everyone have a good day.
Thank you.